Hello, I'm Mark Hammett, minister of the Weber Road Church of Christ in Corpus Christi, Texas. And I'm glad you've joined me for this daily devotional and Bible reading. And I hope that you'll turn to Hebrews chapter 3. Hebrews chapter 3 is where we'll be reading from in just a couple of moments. And I want to take a minute just to invite you to the Weber Road Church of Christ, whether you are able to attend in person or view our services or Bible classes online through our Facebook channel or our YouTube channel. We'd love for you to join us, and we hope that you're encouraged by what you hear and what you see. You know, there's a legend, an old legend about a swan and a crane. You can imagine a beautiful swan gliding by the banks of the water in which the crane was waiting around the shoreline to seek snails. And for a few moments, the crane viewed the swan in wonder and then inquired. He said, "Where do you come from?" The swan replied, "I come from heaven." The crane said, "And where is heaven?" The swan said, "Heaven? You've never heard of heaven?" And the beautiful bird went on to describe the grandeur of the eternal city. She told of the streets of gold and the gates and the walls made of precious stones, of the river of life, pure as crystal, upon whose banks is the tree whose leaves shall be for the healing of nations. And in eloquent terms the swan sought to describe the host who live in this other world, but without arousing the slightest interest on the part of the crane. Finally the crane said, "Are there any snails there?" "Snails?" repeated the swan. "No, of course there are not." "Then," said the crane, as it continued to search along the slimy banks of the pool, "you can have your heaven. I want snails." You know, this fable has a deep and underlying truth that we can pull from it. How many young people to whom God has granted the advantage of a loving Christian home has turned his or her back upon it and searched for snails in life? How many men will sacrifice their wife, their marriage, their children, their family, even their occupation for the snails of sin? How many young girls deliberately turn from the love of parents in a home that wants to help them and encourage them to learn later in life that it's too late and they forfeited their eternal reward for snails? You know, there are a lot of examples that we could use there, of course, but the point is that sometimes we forget about the great blessings that we have, not only here in this life, but also the blessing of an eternal reward promised to us by our God who created us. And all we need to do is to obey Him, to submit to His will, be humble before God, and be faithful unto death, and we will receive a crown of life. Let's go ahead and read from our passage in Hebrews chapter 3. Hebrews chapter 3, starting in verse 12. "Take care, brothers, lest there be any of you with an evil, unbelieving heart, leading you to fall away from the living God. But exhort one another every day as long as it is called today, that none of you may be hardened by the deceitfulness of sin. For we have come to share in Christ, if indeed we hold our original confidence firm to the end. As it is said today, if you hear His voice, do not harden your hearts as in the rebellion. For who were those who heard and yet rebelled? Was it not all those who left Egypt led by Moses? And with whom was he provoked for 40 years? Was it not with those who sinned, whose bodies fell in the wilderness? And to whom did He swear that they would not enter the rest, but to those who were disobedient? So we see that they were unable to enter because of unbelief." Friend, if you're a Christian today, don't be left out of heaven because later in life, perhaps, after a life of faithfulness especially, that you rebel against God and leave His ways. Stay faithful unto death. Don't become, in essence, an unbeliever by your actions and seeking after the snails in life when there is a blessed home in heaven that Christ has prepared for us. Hopefully you've been encouraged by this reading today, Hebrews chapter 3, 12 through 19. And may the Lord bless you richly as you seek to follow His will.